Aloha, kahikiaka e kako. Hello, everyone from the big island of Hawaii. I'm coming to you today from my lanai outside my house in our little coffee farm in Kona. And I'm thrilled to be here. I really appreciate being asked to do this and to share some thoughts with you today. Um, I am sitting here on a farm, and so you may hear some background noise occasionally. I have dogs, cats, horses, chickens, roosters, frogs, who knows. And they almost always interrupt, but we will try to get through, and hopefully they'll just provide a little interest along the way. Last year, I was invited to join a hula halau, a school here that teaches not only dance but culture, the Hawaiian culture as well. And my kumahula my teacher has allowed me to share this oli with you. It's an opening that's very traditional here in Hawaii. We kind of don't do anything without starting with some sort of ceremony. And so I would like to share this with you as a way of bringing a little of the sense of place and honoring the place that I am today. O eka kamakanie pa mane. O ke kaima linoa ehu. E kaulana ne. O ke kaio puai kalai. Kahie na u lana kamali. Kumakoe mai e leo aloha e mai. That only pretty much just talks about Kona and some of the things that make this place very special. It talks about the gentle Kona breeze, the line of clouds that hang just above the ocean horizon, and the traditional chants of the children here in Kona. It grounds us in this place and helps us connect with our heritage here on the island when we ask permission to enter a space of learning. So I wanted to share that with you because I think that honoring our heritage, no matter where we are or who we are, is an important thing to do. Now, I want to be clear that as I speak to you today, I'm using the word heritage in its most liberal sense. Heritage, as I will use it, includes all the intertwined elements in nature and culture. It's an inclusive word. It's intended to be to not just belong to any one people, but to think about heritage that is shared. It's that which connects us all to each other, to our communities, to our countries, to our world. So it's not just about the human component either. It's really about our connection to the natural environment that shapes how we live, no matter where we live. So to me, heritage is a very large concept and much more complex than many people might suggest. And when I talk about heritage resources, those could be very specific natural or cultural elements. Like here on the island, we have an active volcano. We have ancient heiau or temples that were built when the Polynesians first arrived here. It might be more modern sorts of interpretive venues, things like parks, nature centers, museums, botanical gardens, those places that house some of those natural or cultural heritage elements, places where people can visit those things in person. And when I talk about heritage communities, I'm really talking about the combination of all of those things. So the places that value and want to share their natural and cultural heritage resources. So my husband and co-author of Put the Heart Back into Your Community, we've traveled around the world, and we do see great examples of heritage communities everywhere. Almost universally, what seems to make the difference between a really wonderful heritage community and someplace that doesn't feel quite right isn't the lack of heritage resources. Okay, so that's what I was talking about. So we'll just keep going and pretend like you're not hearing that truck in the background and the dog barking. So almost every place has wonderful heritage resources. That part of the equation, it seems to be pretty easy. But the community part is a little more difficult. And I think that's because most communities tend to work in stovepipes. The business community doesn't always talk to the tourism community. The marketing community doesn't always talk to the tourism community or the business community or the residential community. So when everyone's looking out for their own interests like that, it becomes more challenging to find ways to foster heritage communities. I think with that said, we can all acknowledge that we're right now living through something that hasn't occurred in a really long time. This global pandemic is truly enormous. And certainly there's parts of the world that have undergone difficulties before. We've heard over and over again of famines and economic downturns and disasters that have happened in various parts of the world. But the difference this time, I think, is that this pandemic has shut down entire nations at the same time. And that is something that probably none of us have had to live through ever before. So it is different. No country seems to be immune. I started to offer some facts and figures, but the reality is that they change so rapidly that by the time you see this, the situation will be different, dramatically different, probably from it was the day I recorded it. So we all know, in our own countries, how things are going and how things are being dealt with, and we certainly know some of the ramifications for our field. Some of you that are watching now may already be out of work. You may or may not still have a job. Your place of work may be closed, maybe indefinitely. I know here on the island we are trying to figure out what still works. Our tourism arrivals on the island, we were receiving 30,000 people a day. Last week, I think the upper number was 600 on one day, and only a third of those were actual tourists to the island. Another third were people who worked for the airline, and the remaining third were people returning to the island who live here. So things are tough. They've been tough for interpreters for a really long time. I think most of us are aware that interpretation tends to be considered the icing on the cake. And so when when budget cuts come around, very often the interpretive staff or programming, the guides get cut first. Now, it doesn't make sense. It's never made sense, but it is what it is. So I don't think we're any stranger to the kinds of economic hardships that are going on right now, but the magnitude of this is certainly different. I think it's easy to get very frustrated, to get very frightened, to feel very alone while all that's going on. And so I wanted to share a thought from Barack Obama, our former president, that sums up sort of what I hope to leave you with today. He said, "Hope is the belief that destiny will not be written for us, but by us, by the men and women who are not content to settle for the world as it is, who have the courage to remake the world as it should be." I think that's a very important quote right now. I think that this pandemic, if we allow it to, has handed us an opportunity, really. We can, if we have the courage to remake the world as it should be, we are probably going to be starting from ground zero, as it were, for a while yet, trying to put tourism back together in various locations. So I wanted to talk to you a little bit about how you can be part of that effort. You can become more than just the stewards of heritage resources. You can actually help your communities come together to develop a new paradigm to rebuild from this disaster that's overtaken us all. Because it doesn't just affect tourism, it affects every aspect of our communities. So, interestingly enough, we wrote this book, Put the Heart Back in Your Community, 10 years ago, roughly. And at the time, we were thinking that it was a way to give communities something to think about in terms of community development. The book came about because I was actually doing a presentation at a conference, an international conference in Korea, back in 2008, and it was about this book, Interpretive Planning, and the 5M model for successful planning projects. And as we were talking through the concepts in that book, someone in the audience asked me how you would take the notions in this book and apply them to multiple sites within a community. And so if you were going to try to create what we began calling a community experience plan. And so that really got us thinking and looking at how communities work in terms of their development. And so when we wrote Put the Heart Back in Your Community, it was really with the idea that there are ways to think differently about community development and capitalize on heritage resources as a way to tie the community together. So the book is actually, the subtitle is Unifying Diverse Interests Around a Common Theme. And in the book, we talk about some steps to take to begin to use heritage resources in the community to actually guide overall community development. Well, that was roughly 10 years ago, so we were a little ahead of our time, perhaps. Who knew that this would be coming up? And when we pulled this book out to look at it the other day, we realized that it really could be a roadmap for talking to community groups and getting community groups to think about what brings us together instead of what divides us. So the HEART acronym actually stands for the 5 components that we think are important for planning communities. It's not only about heritage resources, it's about looking at the community as a whole. So HEART, of course, is an acronym that stands for 5 different components. H is holistic, E is engaging, A is appropriate, R rewarding, and T thematic. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about the book because you can read it at your leisure. But it goes on to describe how all of those elements can be woven together in community planning as a way to engage people who live there and think about what they need, as well as the people who come there to enjoy those heritage resources. So we have a variety of examples in the book, and part of what we discovered was that the communities that actually seem to work well as heritage communities, those who honor their heritage resources and have a commitment to residents as well as visitors, are those that really think about a triple bottom line approach to development. So considering not just the economy, but the environment as well as social equity over the long term. So all of those things have to be considered as equal pieces of the pie instead of letting just short-term revenue gains dominate development discussions. That's a little tricky to do. I wish there was an easy answer to getting that done, because wouldn't it be a wonderful world if every community was working off that triple bottom line approach, and we could live in a world where planet, people, and profit are all considered important pieces of the puzzle. But I don't think it's as simple as just filling out a form or ticking off boxes. I think every community is a little bit different, and you really have to think about how this pandemic has affected your community and how people are responding to it. I would just suggest that you sitting there listening to this may not realize just how important you are as stewards of the heritage resources in your communities. You may be some of the most important people on the planet right now. Moving forward, I think nobody wants to lose what we already have. We just want to find better ways. The world we've been living in maybe doesn't function as well as it could, or it wouldn't be collapsing around us as we speak. So if we think more sustainably for the future, perhaps we can find better ways to rethink what we've done in the past and move forward. I do want to honor and applaud the doctors and researchers and first responders that are on the front lines actively saving lives. I don't mean to imply that they're not important. They certainly are, and we appreciate everything they do. But when I say that you may be important, just as important, it's just in a slightly different way. Because you're really in the position to take the lead on redefining the way that we function as heritage communities. I want to share with you a headline that was in our local paper last week because it has a direct link to what we're talking about. This was our paper. It says, tourism reboot. What should tourism 2.0 look like in Hawaii County? And I thought it was an interesting article because tourism 2.0, in my view, kind of means doing the same thing again, just maybe a little better. And I'm thinking that a version 2.0 may not be enough. We may need to skip ahead to 4.0 and think further out than just a 2.0. This article quotes some folks from the Hawaii Tourism Authority, which also is an interesting organization because the Tourism Authority actually has no authority for tourism. They are largely comprised of marketing specialists. They don't really have any regulatory authority here, and they don't actively monitor things other than the numbers, the heads in beds, how many people came here, what is the revenue from the hotel industry that goes into our local budget, and that sort of thing. So their primary function has been to increase tourism. And that's what they talk about most frequently, is how we're going to increase tourism. Well, the challenge with that is, first off, it's not their mission. Their mission statement says it's to strategically manage Hawaii tourism in a sustainable manner consistent with economic goals, cultural values, preservation of natural resources, community desires, and visitor industry needs. On their website, they claim that HTA is guided by 4 pillars: natural resources, Hawaiian culture, community, and brand marketing. I think if you think of those 4 pillars as the legs of a table, if you will, if they were all equal, your table would be level and you would be managing, hopefully, in that sustainable manner that is consistent with all of those things that they mentioned in their mission statement. My personal experience with them is that the last thing, the brand marketing, is the tallest pillar, and the other 3 have different levels, and so the table is kind of lopsided, and that's, I think, been a function of individuals within that organization, and a little bit of mission drift towards their personal abilities and backgrounds where they've come into the organization with those skill sets that they have. So my experience is that they are mostly concerned with how do we get more people here. Now the challenge with that is that we are already very stressed here on the island our resources cannot bear more people on the island. Our infrastructure cannot take more people. So if that's what we're going to look at as a reboot, then I think we're going to have some serious issues down the pike. Now, the interesting thing is as I was reading through this article, it says that tourism, Hawaii's #1 industry, is in a reboot, and tourism officials see it as a perfect opportunity to redefine how they go about marketing the state. So that's exactly what we've been talking about. They say, you know, quoting the numbers, that we used to have 30,000 arrivals a day, and now we're getting less than 500. That the graph looks like somebody just dropped the crayon, and that's true. That's all pandemic related. In fact, we've had several celebrities that are making public service announcements that say "Aloha later." Don't try to come to the islands right now because we're not set up for that. So wait until after the pandemic is over, and aloha later. Come then. We still want you, just not right now. And that's, I guess, working pretty well, apparently, in keeping those numbers down. But interestingly enough, as you continue reading through the article, the executive director of the Hawaii Visitors Bureau is saying that perhaps what we need to think about is not just more heads. Let's not think about rebooting in a way that just builds on what's already happening and try to increase. Let's be thoughtful and maybe redefine the tourism experience so that we have perhaps fewer people, but they're paying more for a higher quality experience. Another truck going by, they've been harvesting macadamia nuts, and so macadamia nut harvesting is going on right now, and trucks are going up and down the road. So we'll just keep going. So I guess my hat's off to this one individual who is suggesting that we need to rethink this a little bit and try to not just increase, but actually change the tourism experience here on the island. I think that's going to have to be the case. I also sat in last week on a seminar that was co-hosted by Hawaii Tourism Authority, and that was bringing together representatives of a variety of island states and nations throughout the Pacific region to talk about how the pandemic is causing us to rethink the implications of tourism. Almost everybody suggested that their islands are vulnerable to over-tourism. We really see that here, but we're not alone. It's a unique place, and people love to come here for vacations, weddings, conventions, all of those things. But when they do, they aren't always aware of cultural issues. They don't mean to be destructive, most of them, but walking on some of our cultural sites, our antiquities, can definitely take their toll. Our populations of Hawaiian spinner dolphins, manta rays, humpback whales, all are suffering from over-tourism, people spending too much time with them in the water. So kind of all of these things we're having to look at noise levels over our national parks. We do have an active volcano here on the island, and when it is having active lava flow, it's the thing to do is to get in a helicopter and do a flyover. Some local people who live around the volcano, that area, find that very disturbing, and rightly so. So we've got all of these sorts of impacts going on, and we really need to think about how we move forward in a way that eases the pressure off those resources. So one of the comments that was made by a Hawaiian Tourism Authority representative was particularly striking. He said that before we do anything in moving forward, we really need to go back to the communities and talk to the people. He said that this is the way we do things here in Hawaii. And I agree that it's the way we should be doing things here in Hawaii. It doesn't always happen that way, but it is hopefully moving forward if enough people are saying, yes, we need to go back to the communities and find out what they want rather than just the economic interest. I think will be much more sustainable in the future. So here's the flip side, though. Here's another item that came out a couple of days after that article. In the next a few days later, there was an editorial that came out, and it says, "Make Hawaii a destination for business." So let me just read you a short little bit here. It says, "When I read that the Hawaii County Council was meeting to discuss our economic recovery, I was hopeful. I was surprised, however, to read that the key speaker at the meeting would not be an expert in economic development. Instead, it was an expert in promoting tourism. Rather than double down on an industry whose disruption has resulted in a 37% unemployment, why don't we focus on recruiting entrepreneurs from abroad, growing our own entrepreneurial ecosystem? Let's work to attract technology entrepreneurs and capital from Silicon Valley." So here we have kind of the flip side of the equation. Another another pillar, if you will, of that table, the economic development portion of it. Now, I don't agree nor disagree with this individual. I think it's an interesting comment. We don't have industry as such here on the island. We do have agriculture, as you've heard this morning. You've heard the trucks going by. Cattle ranching, macadamia nut farming, coffee farming, all of those things are part of our economic picture here. So tourism isn't the only thing that we do here, but it is a big thing. So the reason why we don't have a lot of other industry in terms of being another Silicon Valley type place for technological development or other such things is simply because we don't have the infrastructure for it. Hawaii Island is not large. Even though it's called the Big Island, it's only big in relation to the other Hawaiian islands. The population is less than 180,000, and we have 2 small airports and 2 small shipping ports. So it's not the kind of place that industrial production can really easily take place without a significant investment in infrastructure. I will say that I perhaps am a little biased in terms of being a small coffee farmer. I love the island as it is. I love the sleepy, quiet atmosphere that's here. But this dichotomy between tourism, economic development, using other means besides tourism, uh, and keeping residential communities from being overrun and resources from being overrun, it is a really interesting conundrum, and I think it faces every heritage community. So here's my thought: if we let the tourism people drive the process for creating whatever 2.0 version of development is coming, or if the business people drive it, or if the Kanaka Maoli, the Native Hawaiians, drive it, or any special interest group drives the process, we run the risk of keeping that table lopsided. One pillar or another is going to be taller than the others. I would like to find a way to avoid falling into these silos that we've seen in the past, where we feel like we have to compete with other interests in the community. Instead, I would say the best of all possible worlds is for collaboration within the community that brings all interests to the table, so that any decisions that we make are really thought out well and planned with measurable objectives that look beyond the revenue line, to embrace positive impacts, minimize negative impacts to residents, to visitors, and to our resources within those communities. I think coming together with many hands and many heads in a spirit of cooperation, we actually have a word for that here in Hawaii. It's called laulima. And I think it's what we must do to reimagine how our communities can move forward in the future. I think some individual museums, parks, and other interpretive venues are already exploring some new methods for reaching their audiences. Being forced into these shutdowns, I think creative people are figuring out how to run virtual tours, provide access to collections through the magic of the internet. I've loved watching on Facebook how people are dressing up their families and pets as famous paintings. I think that's brilliant, because many of these people have never bothered to look at these famous paintings before. So what a great way to focus on those details and get them engaged in a new way. But while I think that that's a great creative way to kind of handle the immediate need, I would like to suggest that I don't think it's likely to have the kind of long-lasting impact or build a relationship with your audiences that's necessary for continuing support. I know that some people, having tried this, will go, oh, we can just do this, and it's cheaper than rehiring our entire staff or having people put their fingers all over our collections. And I hope that that doesn't happen. I know that some organizations are already headed that direction. But you know, just because you can doesn't mean you should. I think we have to be thinking about the things that well, think about the things that you're missing if you're still engaged in a stay-at-home situation like we are here in Hawaii. As lovely as it is to be able to talk with you today by my computer, I would much rather be there in person. I want to sit down and have this chat over a drink with some interaction instead of just talking at you. I'd like to give you a hug and laugh and have that real-time interaction. I think that's true probably as well, when you think about how people want to experience heritage resources in our communities. I mean, I can watch a National Geographic program about the African savanna or Machu Picchu, but I can tell you, having been to both, that the actual experience is so much richer than seeing it on a screen. And so I know we've had this discussion in this field for some time, talking about whether it's okay to show replica artifacts, or should it be the real thing? Should we settle for costumed reenactments that are not 100% authentic, which they can never really be, I don't think, because certainly some of the things that would go on a historic farm would be pretty stomach churning for the average visitor. So while there are certainly reasons to choose one way of interpreting over another, I think anytime people can get the real thing, have that real experience, they're going to want to do that. I've noticed here that what people are clinging to, what's helping get them through this stay-at-home situation and feeling isolated, is going back to cultural traditions, connections to nature, getting out. And you can't go to a concert, but you can get out and walk in the woods by yourself. And I'm seeing people respond to that in such positive ways that what that tells me is that our cultural traditions, our connections to nature, those are the touchstones, really, that people go back to maintain some sense of normalcy in these crazy, crazy times. When your world's kind of gone off the rails, that's what grounds you, is cultural traditions. It's even if you have to share them over the internet rather than being able to reach out and touch someone. I think it's been interesting to sort of see what role those things play for people in this crazy time. So that brings me all back to you. Oops, sorry about that. Brings me back to you and why I feel like you are so important in getting us past this pandemic. Someone has to step up. Someone has to be the one who suggests bringing diverse interests in the community to the table to talk together. Someone has to take the lead in thinking transformatively. I think that someone could be you, speaking on behalf of your heritage resources in your community. I think you could be the one who suggests that it shouldn't just be the economic interests around the table. It shouldn't just be the tourism interests around the table. Every conversation that we have would be more productive if we had representatives from all over the community meeting together and thinking about how we transform our heritage communities for the future. So I was reading, came across this article by Arundhati Roy called "The Pandemic is a Portal." And I just want to read a paragraph out of it because I think it speaks to where we are right now. He said, historically, pandemics have forced humans to break with the past and imagine their world anew. This one is no different. It is a portal, a gateway between one world and the next. We can choose to walk through it, dragging the carcasses of our prejudice and hatred, our avarice, our data banks and dead ideas, our dead rivers and smoky skies behind us. Or we can walk through lightly, with little luggage, ready to imagine another world, and ready to fight for it. I love that quote because I really do think that although things haven't necessarily been horrible in our world, in certain areas, certainly there are some places in the world where things are pretty horrible on a daily basis, but for most of us in America and in Europe, we really have things pretty good. And I would suggest that even though they are pretty good, trying to go back to where we were is going to be a disappointment. I think we can do better than that. I think it's very easy to get bogged down in feeling a sense of loss for the way things were. But I hope that you won't lose heart. I hope that you're sitting there thinking about what you can do next when you finish with this conference, using what you've learned over the last few days to start something brand new in your community. Think about how you might be able to get the stakeholders in your community together. We are at a pivotal point right now, and the way we respond can make all the difference for how we go forward. If you will take the lead, if you'll step up in the spirit of Laulima, of cooperation and collaboration, you could be the one that makes the difference between really fostering our heritage resource communities or seeing them fall back into the models that weren't working all that well before. I think it's a big ask to think differently, to ask you to be the one who begins to pull your community together. I know that sounds tremendously challenging, and I know there's all sorts of reasons that you could spit right back to me about why that won't work. But going back to Barack Obama, he said, change will not come if we wait for some other person or if we wait for some other time. We are the ones we've been waiting for. We are the change that we seek. I truly believe that. It may not happen quickly, and it won't be easy, but it can happen. I just want to leave you now with the words of Aloha, because I think they pretty much apply to everything I've just talked about. We'll use the word Aloha here in Hawaii. It has many different meanings. It means hello, goodbye. It means a spirit of cooperation. It's a big word for us. It means love. But the words within it, the A-L-O-H-A, come from an oli that I think is expresses kind of the overall idea of aloha. So the first A is akahai. It stands for gentleness. Be kind to other people. Be gentle with them. Lokahi is unity. We all stand together. We're stronger when we stand together. Olu olu is pleasantness, especially in your thoughts. Try to stay positive. Ha'a ha'a is humility. We don't do anything alone. We don't do anything without being grateful for what we have and our community around us. And the last A is ahonui, which means patience. And when we chant the Oli Aloha, we say, ahonui alanakila, with patience comes victory. So never lose hope, never lose heart. Jane Goodall, who is a hero of mine, says you cannot get through a single day without having an impact on the world around you. What you do makes a difference, and you have to decide what kind of difference you want to make.